Mr. Lasser, thank you for having us. And I know that it's a busy week for you and for Brussels, for NATO. And we will have some short questions about the summit. But before that, this is the first time the leaders are coming together face to face in a meeting following the December 2019 London summit. And since then, things have changed. There is a pandemic, and there was a US election, which was probably very critical for the future of NATO as well. Was this 18 months a transformative period for NATO?
Well, very good to be with you, and thanks for the opportunity for the conversation. I think the last 18 months have really made a big difference. In fact, I would say the last 6 months have made a very, very big difference. And let's be very honest, I mean, the election of Joe Biden has been transformative. For NATO, the anxiety was in some sense real, and in some sense, more about perception and psychology important than it was about practical commitment. Because in fact, if you look from the Obama administration to the Trump administration and then to the Biden administration, the American commitment to Europe in a tangible way, diplomatically, certainly in terms of military posture, has only grown, in fact. But Trump's comments about NATO, about Article 5, about other things, about Europe in general, led to enormous anxiety here in this town, in Brussels, at NATO, also at the EU, maybe even more at the EU. And so I think, this week has been an extremely important week in terms of rebuilding that trust and opening a new page for NATO. It would have been very difficult for NATO to embark on thinking about its next steps in terms of strategy without a solid commitment from the United States. And I think they feel they have that now.
And talking about the future of NATO, there's a report now, 2030. It is not finalized. I think it's in work in progress. Probably it will be released and kind of accepted by the countries next year. So how do you find the recommendations in that report, the draft report, or let's say?
Well, it was an important report, but it was a kind of advisory report. And it is completed, essentially. But it's part of a process, as you say. It was an expert-led report delivered to the Secretary General. It had a lot of, very good things, I think, to say about directions for the alliance in the future, about deterrence and defense, about collective defense, about the traditional side of what NATO does, even about nuclear strategy, which we haven't talked a lot about in recent years, and arms control, but also about all the new things, cybersecurity, space, the role of NATO in, as you say, an era in which the pandemic has really shaped our perceptions of many, many things. So it sort of launches the alliance in a direction of thinking anew about its strategic concept, and that's what's coming next. So over the next year, looking towards the next summit in Spain, there will be the preparation of a new strategic concept. The alliance hasn't had a new one for many years. Clearly it is in need of updating, but that's inevitably going to be a more political, maybe even a more contentious process. We'll have to see.
And coming back to the summit yesterday, and there were very high expectations, and partly, as you mentioned, the high expectations come from Biden administration and its kind of significant, the fact that he gives the significance for the multilateralism and international organizations as well. So what would be your assessment of the summit? Do you think those high expectations are met, or do you think it is just a beginning, or do you think they were just wishful thinking?
Well, I think if we think about the transatlantic piece of this, the relationship with Washington as being, in a way, the heart of that question, I think the expectations were absolutely met. I mean, President Biden said all the right things that you could say. And
is it because of the threshold was so low?
Well, but he knows NATO very well. He really does know it very well. He's very well advised. He's very sophisticated on these issues. And he said all the right things. He even talked about the EU at NATO, which presidents don't often do, or U.S. presidents don't often do. So, and then of course it was a wonderful preparation for the meeting that he's having the day after today, in fact, here in Brussels with the EU. So I think if that's the metric, how did the U.S. relate to NATO? It was a complete success. It was remarkable on some other fronts too. The amount of time spent talking about climate change. Its effects on NATO, but also the ways in which NATO can ameliorate its own contributions to climate change. China, The alliance barely said anything about China in the past. There was a lot about China this time. And that tells us something about the future as well.
I think it was mentioned 10 times in the final.
Extraordinary. I mean, different. Now, there are differences of view
Sure.
within this. Clearly, there are nuances. Some countries are keener to push the China challenge as an issue for NATO than others. Clearly, the United States is in the vanguard, but there are others as well. And others are much more cautious about it. There will be differences over things like spending and what to spend on and how to measure it. And I think in that way, also, this administration in Washington is a more congenial interlocutor for NATO. They're very attached to Europe spending more and doing more, just as every previous American administration. But I think they're less orthodox about how you measure it. They're more open to counting other things in that contribution. I think that's very important. And maybe, the most important thing of all is reinforcing this idea of NATO as a political institution as well as a security institution, which of course it always was and is. But, and this goes to the Macron comments over the last year. That the big picture strategic issues should be discussed at NATO. And allies ought to consult before they do things that affect others' interests. And I think that was also very much part of what was mentioned over the last day.
And final questions about Turkey-NATO relations. It has been discussed, it has been debated, and it has been speculated a lot. How did you see the Turkey-NATO relations in this summit and the future? Do you think there will be an evolution of the relationship after this?
Well, look, we all know there are concerns. But in a sense, Turkey, in a way like the United States, has sometimes not been the easiest partner for NATO. The United States and Turkey we're sometimes more similar than we often think. We have a sense of our own exceptionalism, of our own scale, even in terms of the size of the militaries. The U.S. is number one, Turkey is number two. So it's enormously meaningful for NATO, but it doesn't always mean it's an easy relationship to manage. And I think we see some of that. I mean, many of the things that the United States has been concerned about, including the S-400 issue and other things, has also been troubling for NATO allies. There's also the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, which bears on NATO interests. So this was always going to be a bit difficult. That said, I think there's a broad recognition in NATO that Turkey is an extraordinarily important ally. The political relationship may not be easy to manage all the time, but it's essential because it's hard to manage so many of the ongoing crises without Turkey's help.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.